Welcome to the NICU Today Podcast, a podcast to give families a new point of support as they navigate the NICU journey. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe wherever you enjoy your podcast and share this episode with anyone who might find it helpful. Welcome back to the NICU Today podcast. Nicole Nyberg earned her BSN with a minor in psychology from Purdue University and her MSN from Rush University. She currently practices as a neonatal nurse practitioner and serves as a clinical specialist for AngelEye Health. Nicole is also the CEO and founder of Empowering NICU Parents and host of the Empowering NICU Parents Podcast. She actively advocates for NICU families as co-chair of the Advocacy Committee on the Family-Centered Care Task Force. A published author, she has written and co-authored several professional publications, which I am excited to ask her about. After her son was born at just 23 weeks, Nicole devoted her career to supporting, educating, and empowering NICU parents and clinicians. Her work and passion emphasizes how parental presence, engagement, and family-integrated care profoundly influence not only an infant's long-term health and development, but also the overall well-being of the entire family. Together, Nicole and her husband, Josh, are the proud parents of 3 children, 2 precious angels in heaven, and their son, William, who is 11 and a half, as well as the best pup in the land, Rudy, who is 6. Nicole treasures every moment with her family and friends, whether enjoying the beauty of life at their home near High Rock Lake, North Carolina, or embracing new adventures while traveling together. Welcome to the NICU Today podcast.
Thank you so much, Martha. So great to see you. Thank you for having me.
So, Nicole, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into nursing, your career.
Yes, thank you for asking. I grew up in Central Illinois, and ironically, when I was looking at your questions, I laughed at this because my mom used to always say, because I had dark hair, that growing up, I would look so pretty in a white uniform, nursing uniform. And that was back in the day with the white uniform and the white hats. And I think it probably went much further beyond that, because just growing up and being very young, I loved babies. I just loved children and babies. I started babysitting at a very young age. And I think I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to either be in the neonatal world or land or pediatrics. And so going into nursing, it's what I went into right away into college, went to Purdue University and graduated with my bachelor's there. And it took me a bit to get into the neonatal world. I bounced around a lot, but with those experiences, learned a lot of great things. I took care of adults and was in labor and delivery briefly, and then eventually found my way and my niche into the NICU. And I worked as a NICU nurse for a little bit over 10 years before I then went back to pursue my master's degree and became a neonatal nurse practitioner. And just, like I said, it's loved being a NICU nurse. I loved working with parents. I loved taking care of babies, whether they were, extremely premature or just even term and needed, some time in the NICU, and just, cherished my time with the families and seeing, again, these tiny babies. And then eventually, hopefully, sometimes you do have sad and traumatic outcomes, but oftentimes you're able to see these babies go home and see the joy, that families go through whenever they're able to do that and get these babies home.
Well, and talking about your career path that you've taken, and then to see how your life has really intersected with that. So talk to us about your journey to starting a family and how that has really connected with your role as a neonatal nurse practitioner as well.
Yes, because once people hear whenever our story about having our son, William, and how he was born so prematurely, that's often a question is which came first. And ironically, I was one of those that they often say it's the nurse curse. But I met my husband when I was in the midst of in graduate school. God bless him. He stuck by my side even through that. So shortly after graduate school, we got married. I always say I was a little bit on the older side. And so right after we got married, we did not waste any time. We both knew that we wanted a family. And so quickly, started trying to have a family. So I finished graduate school, I guess at the end of August, and we got married at the end of September. Our anniversary is coming up next week. And then we found out we were pregnant in December. And my first trimester with my son went along, beautifully, no problems. And also I should kind of back up. So at that time, then I was working at, I was in the Chicago suburbs at the time, and then we moved down to Central Illinois. And so I was working and kind of training as a neonatal nurse practitioner, waiting for my licensure to come through, all of that. And so kind of training in the role, and, knew I was pregnant, working in a NICU and in a newer place. I did some of my studies there, some of my clinicals there, knowing at the time that I was going to pursue a career there. I was already hired. And so I did know some of the staff, not nearly as well, obviously, had I worked there for years, but so I did know some of the familiar faces, but, and obviously was getting to know them more as I was training there, and a lot of people didn't even know I was pregnant. And then my second trimester came around, and I just, again, a lot of people, I think you and I maybe spoke about this, but you just take a big sigh of relief. You're just like, oh, I got to the second trimester. And unfortunately for me, that's when the problems began. And I was, just had a lot of preterm labor, a lot of just bleeding. I had several admissions into the hospital, and I always say my OB was a very Christian man who did just a lot of things that were not the norm. And he stopped my preterm labor several times. And by the grace of God, we made it to the edge of viability. I was on bed rest for a lot of that. Eventually did have to step away from the bedside working, just because I, was just having so many problems. So of course I'm, worried about my new position as an NNP. And, like I said, I was just doing bed rest at home, mostly, somewhat often on bed rest, and had gotten to a place where I thought things were a little bit better as far as having problems. And I was at 23 weeks, but then ended up contracting and having to be kind of rushed into the hospital again, went to a level 3 in our town where we lived. And I was there as an inpatient, just kind of being watched. Things had somewhat settled down. And then it was at, of course, the strike of midnight in the middle of the night that I ended up having some problems. And they ultimately figured out that I was abrupting. And so at that point, I was 23 and 4/7 weeks. And so they had to do an emergent cesarean section, and they delivered our son, William.
Yes. And we share that 23-week connection, of course. But looking back, almost 15 years for us, over 11 years for you, that was really kind of the edge of viability. That was a really, and still is, so premature to be born. But it is a scary time to go into the NICU. What did your NICU journey look like, especially with your experience in the NICU, and how did that work to be mom and also know so much information that many of us don't know going into the NICU?
Right. Yes. I always say it was a blessing and a curse. When I was actually on bed rest at the hospital before I knew I was going to have him, I got to know those nurses well, and, joking now, but I actually said, if I have to crawl across this bed and intubate my own son, I will. And unfortunately, I was under general anesthesia and obviously not in the right place to be able to do that. I wish I could have. But because we were at a level 2, he had to be transferred to actually where, we chose to have him transferred where I was working at the level 3. I unfortunately had to stay back, just having a cesarean section. So it's difficult. I knew a lot, but also, knew a lot as a NICU nurse, knew her as the role as a provider or as an NNP. I knew how to take care of him, but I also very, very much knew, just as you said, even 11 years ago, that was the edge of viability. They were not saving babies less than 23 weeks at that time. And even then, 23 weeks was it. And that, I thought when they were taking me back for the cesarean section, especially being in a level 2, that he would not make it out alive. And praise God. God had different plans for him, and William was very, very determined and strong, and kind of declared himself. But, going into the NICU, it was difficult because, like I said, a lot of the nurses knew me. They didn't know me well. Some stepped right up very kindly, bravely, compassionately, and just said, like looked at me as a mom and a friend and a colleague and just said, let's take care of him together. Others were a little bit more intimidated by me. But it got to be where they knew once we were able to do skin to skin and got to know my routine. I was there every single day. Came in first thing in the morning for his first feed. And they would say, Nicole, what is your plan for the day? What time are you going to hold him skin to skin? And, and obviously as he got more stable, that changed. But I also knew, I didn't like it when my mom or my mother-in-law, they would say, he's doing so well. And I'm just like, oh, let's not talk about it. Like, I just didn't want to rock the boat. I knew things, at 30 weeks or when he was so many weeks old, he was at an increased risk for necrotizing enterocolitis. And I knew he could have feeding intolerance. And on Mother's Day, he ended up, had a little brief bout of sepsis. And just, there were so many things that I knew. I knew the head ultrasound when that was coming up, what that meant. So it was very difficult, but I also knew, like I said, how to take care of him. And so when I was there, I helped with containment and covered his eyes from the light and really tried to be very involved and very much like neuroprotection, neuropromotion, which, it helped, I hope, a lot. And like I said, just really tried to advocate for him as much as I knew how. And that delicate balance of, I'm his mother, but I'm also a provider here at this institution. And so that was the tricky part, though, is if there were things that I didn't necessarily love or like how we're being handled, then that was kind of the difficult balance to manage. And I just had to navigate that very carefully.
Those head ultrasound days, they were difficult ones, right?
Mercy. Yes.
Yeah.
I laugh because I was sitting there with my sister-in-law. I don't know if it was his first one or his second one. I was pumping and I was so nervous as I was moving milk around from bottle to bottle. I sat there and literally dumped my fresh pumped breast milk because I was so nervous about it. And again, you can't cry over spilled milk. And I sat there and cried because you're just so nervous and on just eggshells. You just know what it means or what it could mean. And those are tough days.
Yeah, really, really tough days. I did want to ask you, so it's so interesting to hear you talk about trying to find that balance between the provider role and then being a parent in the NICU. How did that impact the way that you serve families now and change your approach of kind of that care team?
It changed everything. I always say having William changed me in every way, personally, professionally, and just as a human being. I look at everything differently, but absolutely in how I speak with families and how even after I present their baby during rounds, I don't say, do you have any questions? I just say, what questions do you have? Because I know that they have questions. They just may not know what they are or may be afraid to ask them. And again, as you know, you don't know until you know what this experience is like. And then once you go through it, as much as you don't want to be a part of this community, you have an understanding of what those parents and families are going through. And I don't share my story with every single family I encounter, but those that might be struggling, I will say a little something or speak with them about it and say, I understand. And I just really try to be there for them and be very empathetic. I want them to be obviously involved and I want them to understand what's going on. I think that that's really important. And it just changes everything about, I look back at myself and I can do this now, but as a young NICU nurse and the conversations we used to have at the chart, at this, nurses station and talking about upcoming vacations or, something we did last weekend. And it's just like, oh, golly, I just wish you could go back and change it. And, there might be nurses that I work with now, or even that I worked with at the unit where William was. And again, they're socializing and gossiping. And I'm like, you guys, like, I will say, like, these are the worst days of these parents' lives. This is not where they want to be. Let's just have a little bit of empathy and try really hard to I know this is our job and we go day in and day out, but we have to be a little bit more conscientious about our conversations, the things we're saying. It changes everything. And I just really try to put myself back in their shoes and just be there as much as I can, and just try to, like I said, update them and do what I can to be helpful.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the nurse perspective too, and talking about it being the job, right, that you go to each day. Paul and I, my husband Paul, we just delivered a presentation on the 5 key takeaways of the powers of nursing, and that is the 5th takeaway is remember your why. And during our presentation, we must have referenced at least a dozen of the nurses who took care of us through all of our birth experiences with all 4 of our children, 2 living, 2 keeping watch from above. But we talk about the impact that those nurses can have, and that it is some of the worst days and some of the best days of our lives when we see milestones being hit and getting closer to being able to go home. Now, you talk about having the family involved. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about I know you've done you're a published author and you have some different publications. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you have authored and what's out there available to read?
Sure. Yes. So again, it goes back a little bit to just I always call it now a dual perspective as a NICU mom and also a NICU provider, and having a new perspective on what that means. I truly feel like my involvement, there were a lot of things that went into it, and it's certainly more than one aspect, but my involvement with William and his time in the NICU, with his containment, trying to advocate for him, and just, all the things, and even a little bit of my knowledge, I think truly was beneficial for him and his outcomes. And I just had gained such an incredible appreciation for how powerful the parental presence is, and started to really learn and look more at research about just that I do truly think knowledge is power. And I think, there's so much research that shows when parents understand and have more knowledge about what's going on in such a foreign environment like the NICU, in a place that can be so incredibly intimidating, the more that they understand and know what's going on, not only like in the surroundings, what this monitor is and what is this, but what is happening with my baby? What is their plan of care? What are we focused on today? What are the goals? Just little things. What was their biggest milestone yesterday or today? Those little things matter, because once the parents understand, and even if it's bit by bit, and I always say, if you don't understand something today or the way that person explained it, then ask somebody else, because somebody else might explain it in a way that makes a little bit more sense to you. But with that knowledge, it actually has been shown to help with attachment and all of that bonding. And when parents in the NICU, which it can happen when they don't bond or have that attachment, then that is what can negatively impact those long-term outcomes for the babies. In the NICU, as a care team and providers, we want babies to go home and we want them to be healthy. But if we have a healthy baby going home to a family that has not been there and they're not attached or bonded with their baby, that will impact then their long-term outcomes. So we need the whole family to be healthy. We need the parents to be there and to understand. And obviously they need to know how to take care of them as well. And, that goes a little bit into the work even that I'm doing at AngelEye. Just some of the things that we're working on is, again, like parents need to understand what's happening, be educated on it, feel confident in caring for their baby, so that when they go home, they can continue that plan of care and understand it and continue to do that attachment and bonding. So most of the articles are and research is a little bit based on that. I've presented at some conferences before. And so, but that's typically where the passionate writing comes from, is just talking about parental involvement, engagement, and just how much it truly can impact the outcome for specifically the baby, but really the entire family unit.
And that kind of ties back to that patient-family integrated care.
Right. Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Just really, it's more so in Europe, they talk about family integrated care. Family-centered care is what you'll probably hear more in the United States. But it truly is just the parents are not visitors. They are absolutely the parents of that baby. It is very much not, like I said, what the parents wanted. They do not want to be taking care of their baby in the NICU, but they need to learn how. So despite where the baby is at, they still have to learn how to take care of their baby. And it is very intimidating when it's a tiny baby hooked up to several monitors and wires and tubes. But we as the care team have to guide them, and whether it's a very slow step-by-step process, putting a hand on their back just for the first time, and then eventually changing diapers. But we have to, eventually teach them how to feed them and how to do those things. And so very much like family-centered care is just like centered on the family. What are their unique circumstances? And if mom has to work throughout the day and she's coming in the evening, well, then that's what we focus on. Is mom's coming in the evening, somebody needs to go and update her in the evening. And then she needs to be very much involved in the evening. And so just making sure that the family is they're the entire unit, that the care is centered on them, and that they feel confident in caring for their baby. And again, that they understand what's going on with them, because that truly impacts, again, that attachment bonding, skin to skin care. I'm also very passionate about that. All those things just kind of go into it, just because, again, and trauma informed care, all those, like I said, all those things, it's a whole culture shift that, a lot of units are going for. There's a lot of units that think that they're there and they're not quite there. There's there's a lot of pieces that go into it, even from the signage, from when you're walking to your car up to the unit for the parents. What does the signage look like for families? Is it very welcoming? Is it, in languages or other languages so that families can understand and get to the unit well, and just things like that, just very welcoming.
Well, and I think it was so important that you said, for the listeners joining us today as well, that you are not visitors in the NICU. This is your baby. You are a part of the care team. And I know with your work with AngelEye Health, we're proud to be partners with AngelEye Health as well. And we just released, in partnership with AngelEye, the advocacy checklist. Yes. With not only, questions that we came up with, but also our friends at NICU alumni and AngelEye. And we were able to collaborate on that piece, which families can go and download from the AngelEye website. And so being a part to have those questions to get started, I think, is so key.
Yes. And that's, one of the reasons I love that is it brings up very simple, tangible things that families might forget about. Again, as you know, and many NICU parents that might be listening, it is a whirlwind, and you barely can put your socks on in the morning. And I know, like, it's very much for me. I woke up and I just went and I did. You don't hardly process. So sometimes you forget those simple things, even like adding your baby to your insurance by 30 days of life. Like, there are also, just other things that you can do to feel like a parent, because that's, again, goes back to the other thing, is a lot of times parents don't feel like parents to their baby when they're in the NICU. And so, yes, just those tangible tips that, like Martha said, that you can go and download that will just help you step by step. Again, you don't need to do all of them in one day, but it's just a great guide to be able to help you get through and to remember basic things to do, almost kind of from admission and then through discharge. Because again, I need checklists to get through my daily life, to remember to do certain things. And sometimes it's as simple as like writing an email, and so it's difficult to be a human, let alone a parent in the NICU. And so, yeah, I love that collaboration that we did. And so we will have that on the AngelEye website, but then also have it other places that we can probably, put in the links as well that Martha mentioned.
Yes. And speaking of resources available, tell us about your nonprofit organization, Empowering NICU Parents.
Yes, thank you. So again, with everything that I went through, I always say it took me a few years to get through, which is still a work in progress, but just the grief and trauma and everything that we went through with William. But I just felt when we had him in the NICU, I was looking for just a kind of a journal and a way, to be able to help parents. So I first created a journal, just using kind of the medical knowledge, but something that I felt like would be great for parents, because it was just something that I didn't have in the NICU when William was a patient in there. And then that kind of just evolved into Empowering NICU Parents as a whole. And just really, it's more of a kind of a social media platform, just trying to, again, educate and empower parents, so that little pieces of knowledge, but then also empowerment, things that you can, questions you can ask. Again, I talk about skin to skin care, how important it is, simple things like going in and just, I think parents forget that you can ask, when am I able to do skin to skin care with my baby? And that is your baby. So you're allowed to ask that. And the care team may say, not today, we're not quite there yet, but then ask the next day. And so it started out as that, and then eventually evolved into a podcast. And so just like the great work that Martha and Paul are doing here on NICU Today, we do a podcast, and some of it is just educational. Again, talk about high jaundice levels and respiratory distress and just educational things, just again, for parents' knowledge. I try to take it and bring it down to a level that just makes sense for parents. And other times it's uplifting stories. Sometimes they are sad stories. So I have parents on. I have, sometimes just even other providers. So just, it's a variety of topics. And again, it's just to hopefully help other parents and clinicians and just bring awareness to all things NICU related. And hopefully it touches somebody, or at least one of the episodes will help families and clinicians in one way or another.
Love it. Love it. And how is William doing today?
Oh, one of my favorite subjects. He is doing fantastic. He is in 5th grade. He is 11 and a half, and just such a blessing. He is such a kind, soft-hearted soul. So he is very loving and just doing really well. We are very blessed, early on, followed with early intervention, and needed a little bit of PT and speech, but overall is doing well. He's a really great swimmer. He swims competitively now, which I absolutely love to watch, and am still amazed by him and just everything that he's accomplished. And, as with your former preemies, it's amazing to just look at them and think of where they started and where they are, and not get emotional about it every single day. But yeah, I always say he teaches me more and has taught me more about life and living and everything than anything ever has in my life.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Anything else we didn't cover today? Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
I would say for the parents, there was a mom I actually had on the podcast the other day that she just talked about how, essentially kind of what I was saying, but just how amazing, these babies in the NICU are, how resilient they are. And, you never thought that you would have such awe and that your child could be so inspiring to you. So just really cherish the milestones, even the small milestones that they do every single day. And I would just, again, say for parents, truly ask, what can you do for your baby as a parent each day, whether it's skin to skin care or, again, ask about providing breast milk and ask questions. I think, again, it's just really important to be empowered and to have the knowledge of what's going on with your baby. Just don't be afraid to ask and to be involved. And for clinicians, just remember that this is the parent's baby, and let's just try to be as welcoming to the family and get them as involved as we can, because it truly will help with the outcomes for the baby and the family.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for being here today, for sharing so much about your story, and really that interesting dynamic of being a nurse practitioner, but also being a parent who has experienced the NICU with such a premature baby, which, again, we share. But thank you, Nicole, for what you're doing to help so many parents, not only from the clinical side, but also just that personal and emotional side, which is so important. But really appreciate you being on the NICU Today podcast.
Thank you so much, Martha, for having me. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the NICU Today podcast, brought to you by Today is a Good Day. Learn more at todayisagoodday.org.